Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Hilary Powell again, and now we're in our third part of our mini-series on navigating caregiver stress and wellness. In this final part of the series, I'm going to be talking to you about some tips from the mental health field for navigating some of the common stressors associated with caregiving. Now, by this point in the series, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. It's associated with all these stressful outcomes. That's making me even more stressed, right? We've been talking about stress, which in and of itself can be stressful. Now, I think sometimes we can leave these conversations feeling like, oof, oh my gosh. We might even feel worse than when we started them. So I wanted to share this quote with you. It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it, by Lena Horne. This kind of sentiment I've seen tossed around by a few figures in history. And the idea is that stress happens. We have a built-in response for stress, so gosh, do we know that stress happens. Our body's prepared to deal with it. It's all about how we respond to that stress in our lives. So here I'm going to provide you with some skills, various coping skills from the field of mental health that are shown to be helpful for caregivers. And some of them are just shown to be helpful in general for combating chronic stress. So here's just an overview of where we've been. So, of course, in our first part, we talked about stress more broadly. In our second part, we talked about specifically what does caregiver stress look like. And now we're at the most fun part because I get to give you some tips and coping skills for working through the stress of caregiving. Now, these skills are coming from the field of mental health that have been shown to be helpful for caregivers specifically, or to be shown to be helpful when a person is feeling really stressed. So there's a good evidence base that I'm going to be tapping into with each. Now I'm going to be basing this final part of this mini-series on those 6 major stressors that caregivers tend to report time after time. I'll be giving you a few things that you can do for each of them. Now, one of the first stressors that I mentioned in the last video is that many caregivers report a sense that they can't clock out. They're always on call. There's no clear start or end to their caregiving duties. This can lead to more opportunities for stress events, and it can also make it harder to relax and take care of yourself. So we know that an important service is seeking respite care when it's available. There may be services in your community that provide respite care, or maybe you have a loved one or a friend who you trust to help you out and give you a little bit of a break when you really need one. Now, this is a really important tip, and I don't want you to underplay it, but I know that a lot of people hear this and think, well, that's not available to me, or I don't really trust anyone to be able to do this and do it well. Or maybe you feel like it's asking too much of others. So there are a few other things that you can do to give you a sense that you're able to clock out, that you're able to relax. Now, there's a lot of talk out there about self-care, and that's where this is going. Yeah, I'm talking about self-care. And you might roll your eyes and think, Hilary, I don't have time for self-care. I'm a caregiver, I'm really busy, and I'm navigating all these other responsibilities at the same time. Well, I get that. So I'm not going to ask you to add. Instead, I'm going to ask you to substitute in your day. Self-care is more about quality than it is quantity. I could take a hot, relaxing bath in the morning and in the evening every single day. And if I'm in that bathtub thinking about the next thing that I have to do, well, that's not very relaxing. So again, I want you to focus on quality over quantity when we're thinking about me time. Look at your day. Look at how it's structured. How do you spend moments of your day? When you're waiting for your loved one at the doctor's office, are you scrolling on your phone kind of absent-mindedly? Are you picking up a magazine and just kind of flipping through it? Are you planning the next thing in your day? And is there a way to spend this time better? Maybe instead of scrolling on your phone in the doctor's office, you can go for a quick walk around the perimeter. Maybe when you're eating, which I'm hoping that you're doing, maybe instead of scarfing down that granola bar in the car as you're driving to the next appointment, maybe you can wait and eat that, even if quickly, a bit more mindfully. Maybe when you're going to take a sip of water, you take a deep breath too. How are you spending your time? What's the quality of that time? And where can you amp up the quality and make it more rewarding? Now, it's important to clock out sometimes mentally, and doing things like scrolling can help with that on your phone. Doing things like taking a nap can help with that. These are important too, but it's about balance here as well. Maybe sometimes you have to just look on Facebook. Maybe sometimes you just have to take a seat and zone out. But sometimes I also urge you to look at the way you're spending your time and think about how you can do so more mindfully. Now, there are some activities that you can do in even a brief period of time where you otherwise might be spent stressing or worrying or zoning out. And these are things like deep breathing and stretching. This is a chance for our body to slow down, and that can tell our brains that it's okay, you don't have to be stressed. That's right, there's an important link here. If our body is calm, our brain is more likely to be calm, and vice versa. So change what you can. So I'm going to lead us through a brief breathing activity that you can do when you're driving, when you're waiting in the doctor's office, when you're going to pick up some medication. It's something that you can fit into many moments of the day. And this technique is a deep breathing technique referred to as square breathing. So what I want you to do is to kind of sit or stand comfortably if you're standing, or lie comfortably if you're lying down. Now let your body open up. And I'm going to ask you to pay attention to each part of the breath. So with square breathing, we use a square visual, okay? So the first part of the square is the inhale of the breath. Now with square breathing, I want you to try to extend each part of the breath. So see if you can spend a nice 4 seconds inhaling. The next part isn't just the exhale. A nice relaxed breath should have a pause before we exhale. So an inhale for 4 seconds and a pause for 4 seconds. Now we get to that other side of our square. We're at the exhale. And try to do it slowly. Again, extending the exhale. And holding that exhale for about 4 seconds if you can. And then finally, we're throwing in another pause here. Again, this is an important part of telling our brains that our body is truly relaxed. So let's do it all together. Inhale, 1, 2, 3. Hold, 1, 2, 3. Exhale, 1, 2, 3. Hold, 1, 2, 3. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. And as you're doing this square breathing, I want you to imagine a baby's breath and the way that stomach rises and falls. Try to breathe into your stomach instead of breathing shallowly into your chest. And try to do this square breath at least 5 times, and it's great if you can keep it up for even a minute. Again, this is an important part of calming down the stress response, and it's something we can fit into most moments of our day. Again, it's about quality over quantity of that self-care time. Now, the second common stressor that caregivers report is not feeling like they even can recognize their own needs anymore. They're so used to taking care of others that they stop paying attention or even prioritizing what their own bodies and souls really need. It's common for folks to stop engaging in meaningful or enjoyable activities when they're really stressed out. We can even overlook those basic things that we need, like drinking enough water on a hot day or eating regularly and eating nutritiously. That's important too. Again, that quality over quantity piece. So it's important to note that taking care of our needs and doing things that are meaningful or enjoyable, these are the things that help us relax. It helps dampen that stress response. It can help us reset. It can help us gain perspective. And it can help us be even better caregivers because we can show up with our whole selves instead of our super stressed out selves. So we might have the mentality that we have to stop doing those things that are important, but that tends to catch up with us over time and cause us to feel more stressed. So there are a few things we can do here. Now, one thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to reflect on what sorts of activities have you stopped doing recently? What did you do before you became a caregiver? And what kind of fell off the table? Now, maybe some of it you can't do anymore, and that's okay if you're at a different stage of your life. But I want you to challenge yourself to think of what are those things, and is it really the case that I can't do them anymore? Maybe yes, maybe no. So something that I suggest to folks is to make a list of activities that you find to be meaningful or enjoyable. Now I say meaningful or enjoyable because it's important to enjoy yourself. But sometimes things that feel really meaningful and valuable might not be fun, but they can feel important. Now I want you to go wild on this list. Write down everything that you can think of that you like to do, that you find meaningful, that you have fun doing. Then what I want you to do is to sort that list by effort. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this is the least effortful and this is the most. But what I like to do is to chunk my list into activities that take 5 minutes or less, activities that are brief but maybe more than 5 minutes, activities that take a little longer, maybe a few hours, and then activities that can take a lot longer than that, like a few days even. So for example, in my brief activities list, I have petting my dog. I love my dog. She's a little Chihuahua Corgi mix. She yaps a lot. But giving her a nice little pet is relaxing, and it doesn't take much time at all. This is the part of the list that people can struggle with the most, but it's one of the most important because as a caregiver, you don't have a ton of time. So we want to make best use of those moments that you do find yourself free. Then on my shorter, that kind of brief but more than 5 minute section of my list, I have things like doing a brief series of yoga poses. This usually takes me around 10 to 30 minutes depending on what I decide to do. So it's a little bit more intensive. Maybe I'll even change into my yoga clothes. But it's still not going to take me all day. I can slip it in between tasks. Something that takes a medium amount of time might be something like going for a walk at the local park. I have to drive there, put on my walking shoes. The walk itself might take me an hour. It's something I really have to schedule into my day. And then those longer activities are things like going to visit my parents for the day or going for an overnight hiking trip with my friends. These are things that are harder to fit in, but sometimes have some of the greatest impact. It really helps to reset us. Now, it might feel silly to make this list because maybe you just know what you like to do, but it's important to have it written down because writing it down is a cue for us to engage in these behaviors. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, but you have a minute, sometimes it's hard to even think about what you like to do, hence the purpose of the slide. And so you have it written out and there in front of you, so you don't even have to think about it. You can just do it. Now, another piece here is easier said than done. What I'd also like you to do is make a super brief checklist. I like to make it on a whiteboard so I can check it off and then wipe it off each day. I want this checklist to only have maybe 3 to 5 items on it of your basic needs. Maybe drink 64 ounces of water is one, eat 3 meals in the day is one, and maybe another is get 8 hours of sleep. I wish, maybe 6 or 7. Maybe you add a few others to that, like calling your friend might feel like a basic need. But the point is to keep it brief. And this is so that it's something that you're looking at each day to help put you in that intentional mindset of taking care of your basic needs. Again, easier said than done, but having that reminder is key. So the next stressor I want to tackle are those guilty feelings that can come with caregiving. You might feel guilty like you didn't do a good enough job. You might feel guilty because you feel like your loved one isn't happy with their living situation. You might feel guilty because you got snippy with your loved one. Or maybe you feel guilty because of certain feelings you have, like, oof, you feel frustrated that you have to be a caregiver. Guilt is a really common experience of caregivers. So importantly, we know that guilt is often caught up with lots of negative thoughts. Often negative thoughts, of course, about ourselves and the things that we've done or want to do. So our thoughts have a big impact on how we feel and behave. If I think that I'm a good person, I'm generally going to feel pretty good. I'm going to feel ready to help others. If I think I'm a bad person, I might feel kind of depressed. And if I have a chance to help others, I might be worried that I'm going to mess it up. This is the power of thoughts. So notably, our thoughts aren't always rooted in reality. A fun little saying I have for this is don't believe everything that you think. Sometimes thoughts just happen. You might have the thought, I'm a failure. I'm a terrible daughter. Just because we have this thought doesn't make it true. And yet, these untrue thoughts can continue to impact us. Now, what I'd like you to do here is to notice what's within and outside of your control when you're feeling guilty. So maybe you notice that you feel guilty because mom doesn't seem to be happy with the nursing home that you were able to get her set up with. But maybe it's the only nursing home that had an opening for her, or the only one that you could afford. That's outside of your control. Maybe there are things that you feel guilty about that you can change. Maybe you notice that you've been more irritable with mom when you go to see her. And maybe you can be less irritable by giving yourself some time to take a nice walk before you go and see her. Importantly here, I want you to delineate the two. When you're stressed out, what's within your control? Write it all down. And what are you stressed out about that's outside of your control? Write that all down too. The writing part is important. You might be tempted just to be thinking it, but writing it down gives us an objective look at our thoughts. It kind of gives us a bit of a kick in the butt sometimes, a bit of a new perspective on how we think. When we're talking about what's within your control, sometimes we focus a lot on the past, things that we feel we've done wrong. Now, we can do better in the future, absolutely. But what's happened has happened. It's outside of our control. We can learn from it, but we can't change it. Now, the next tip here is also really important. So, like I said, sometimes we have thoughts that don't reflect reality. We might have the thought that I should be able to make mom happy. I should be able to do this without getting irritable with them. So these shoulds should be a red flag when you have them. Because the thing about this kind of should thinking is that it tends to make us feel crappy. It tends to make us feel like the thing that we should be doing is a mandate, that if we don't do it, we're a terrible person. So here, I want you to notice when you're falling into should thinking. I should do this. I should have done that. And I want you to catch that thought, check it out, and change it. That's right. Catch it, check it, change it. I want you to change that thought to say, I will try, instead of I should. So if you think, I should have been nicer to mom when she was acting in a way that felt kind of embarrassing. Well, again, this thought, it's not something we can change if maybe we acted that way. It's in the past. And again, it makes us feel kind of bad. I want you to focus instead on behaviorally, what can you do? Next time mom acts in a way that feels kind of embarrassing, I'll try to explain to the people around me why she's doing what she's doing. I'll try to reassure her in those situations. You see how that feels different than saying, I should reassure her. I should have just told people why she's acting this way. That can have an impact on how we feel, and that slight change of language can impact our levels of stress more broadly. This catch it, check it, change it skill here is helpful for all sorts of negative thoughts that you might have. So I'm asking you to pay attention to the way that you're thinking. See if things are outside your control or inside your control. Notice when you're having these kinds of should thoughts. And notice those other kinds of negative things you say to yourself. See if you can catch it. See if you can really look at it. Is this based in reality? And see if you can change it to gentler, more balanced language. Now, it's common for caregivers to report a sense of grief when it feels like the roles have been reversed in a relationship. So when relationships change, we often miss the way that they were. We feel like we've lost something. Now, this next tip is directly linked to this. It doesn't change that sense of loss. It doesn't really change the grief, but it can feel different to reflect on how the roles in the relationship has changed. Again, maybe you're caregiving for a mom, for your dad, for a partner, for someone that you respected who supported you. It can be a big change to take on the role of caregiver. So I want you to close your eyes for a moment here. I want you to imagine your loved one when they were healthy. What did they look like? What did they sound like? What kinds of things did they do? And I want you to imagine talking to them about the caregiving that you're providing for them now. What would they say to you? Go ahead and sit with this for a moment. Notice if you feel like they'd be proud, if you think that they'd feel like you were doing something real good for them, that they'd be grateful. And allow yourself to hold on to those feelings. Again, it doesn't wipe away the grief, and it can even really intensify that sense of loss and change. But it can also make us feel different about this situation of the roles changing. Now, a really important warning sign that caregiver stress is really amped up is the sense that you might feel forced into caregiving. that you didn't have a choice in the matter. Now, this is important because whenever we feel like we don't have a choice, that we've been forced into something, we tend to see a link here with a sense of resentment and unhappiness with life more generally. Now, it's easy to feel resentful when we feel like we weren't ready to be caregivers. And again, often if we notice these kinds of feelings, we might feel guilty, which might make us feel more stressed, more sad. And yet, it's a common experience for individuals who are caregiving for their loved ones. So what I want you to do here is to make a list of your top values. Maybe you value things like authenticity, openness, nurturance. Maybe you value things like your spirituality or your family's closeness. Go ahead and pause me if you need, but try to come up with 5 to 10 values that really lead and direct your life. Now, when you're done with this, I want you to think about how caregiving lends to each of these values. Now, you might have certain values that there's not a clear link. That's okay. Not all of our values are going to be checked off by caregiving. For example, I might really value adventure, and it might feel like I can't go on the adventures I want to go on because I'm providing this important caregiving, love, and support. Still, it's possible that some of those values you have listed down there are very much fulfilled by being a caregiver. When that happens, I want you to reflect on these values that match up with caregiving from time to time. Maybe each morning you set that intention of living your life in accordance with that value of nurturance or family. As you go about your day and taking care of your loved one, you might notice that you feel like you're living a more valuable life. That's just because it's going to be more on the top of our minds. We're going to be more intentional about the way we approach the day. Now for this next tip, this is easier said than done. Sometimes you either do or you don't. But I want you to see if you can identify with this label of caregiver. Try it out for yourself. Go ahead and say it. I am a caregiver. I'm a caregiver. By identifying more and more with being a caregiver, by connecting with other caregivers, looking for support groups in your area, it can feel more and more like this is a valued part of your life, rather than something that you were strong-armed into. Finally, it's common for caregivers to know or to have the sense that the situation is not going to get better. Maybe their loved one is sick and there's no cure. Maybe we're talking about aging here, and you can't cure aging. A person might have a certain disability that we know isn't going to change. This can make it hard to feel hopeful about the future. Now, importantly, many people tend to be fixers. We see a problem and we want to fix it. We might see someone who's sick and we want to cure them. The problem is not all issues in our lives can be solved, can be fixed, can be cured. Some of them simply exist. Now, this is going to bring me to the idea of coping approaches. So we might categorize coping into problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. Problem-focused coping is fixing. There's an issue in your life and boom, you get it done. You make it better. You resolve it. Emotion-focused coping refers to paying attention to how you're feeling about an issue, and seeing if you can make yourself feel better. Maybe a cup of ice cream makes you feel better. Maybe a nap makes you feel better. Maybe going to a support group. Maybe going on a walk. Maybe these things make you feel better. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't solve anything. But it looks at your emotions and it helps you to feel like those emotions are more manageable. Now, what can happen is that folks get stuck in fix-it mode. They become problem-focused copers without the ability to flexibly move into emotion-focused coping. Now, this is great to be a problem-focused coper, again, for things that can be fixed. Maybe an appointment got double booked and your loved one's appointment ended up having to be canceled. You can get on the phone and reschedule that appointment. You fixed it. It's not stressful anymore. You got it done. But again, maybe your loved one has a chronic condition that isn't going to get better. It's not something you can cure or fix. You might try to fix it. You might want to fix it. And you might put all of your energy there. See, this is the time where we need to pivot and become emotion-focused copers. So I want you to think here, what is one way you can soothe your emotions? What helps you to feel calm, even when you're feeling overwhelmed? Go ahead and write that down. Maybe you can write a few down. Maybe you can keep it on a Post-it note right next to your computer or right next to your calendar. Keep it readily available to you to remind yourself that even if you can't fix something, you can make something feel a little bit better for you. Now, another tip here is that in these cases where things don't get better, it can just feel like one long slog. Like we're just doing the same thing day in and day out. I want you to take time to celebrate the small victories of each day. Now, it might not be that you're actually winning anything or fixing anything for that matter, but maybe something felt like it went well. Maybe you were able to have a good conversation with Dad. Maybe you went for a lovely walk with a friend. Maybe something in your schedule got loosened up and you're able to actually have a breather and maybe even a good long meal in the middle of the day. What I'd like you to do is see if you can make a practice of reflecting at the end of each day on 1 to 3 things that went well. Go ahead and write those down in a journal. Over time, you'll have pages and pages of these small victories that have happened for you. And looking them over can even be a part of that emotion-focused coping when you're feeling stuck and really bogged down. So what did you think about my coping skills? Is there anything that you think I should add? Are there things that you found to be helpful for coping with caregiving stress? Feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to give you my email at the end of this presentation. Now, I want to leave you with a few resources before I do this. So I want you to know that the Caregiver Foundation works to support caregivers and individuals needing care through a variety of their services. You can go ahead and go check them out online at thecaregiverfoundation.org. It's going to look like this over on this side of the screen if you're navigating to this website somewhere in the midst of 2021. If this presentation gets a little old, it might look a little bit different, but the link should stay the same. Now you can also call the office at 808-625-3782 to connect with them. There are also some national resources that I wanted to point you to. So you can call the Administration on Aging's Elder Care Locator, and they can help connect you with services in your community. There's also a support line for caregivers put out by the Caregiver Action Network, and you can reach them by dialing 1-800-677-1116. Thank you so much for sticking with me during all 3 parts of this mini-series. Again, I'd love to hear from you about your takeaways, maybe some things that you found should be really helpful for navigating caregiver stress. Reach out to me with any questions or thoughts that you have at hpowell1@une.edu. So that's hpowell1@une.edu. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you to the Hawaii Resiliency Fund through the Hawaii Community Foundation for their generous support for the College of Caregiving series with the Caregiver Foundation. We're grateful for all that you do.